My key stuck in the lock for what felt like forever. 10 months in Zurich had made everything about home feel foreign, but this was different. The door finally opened and I heard my television playing inside. The smell hit me immediately, stale beer, old pizza, and cologne I didn't recognize. A leather jacket hung over my mother's antique chair, the same chair I'd specifically asked Connor to protect while I was working overseas. Half-eaten food sat on her mahogany coffee table, leaving water rings on which she'd polished every Sunday for 30 years. I set my suitcase down as quietly as possible, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Someone had been living in my house. The realization crept over me slowly, like cold water filling my lungs. This wasn't a break-in. This was something much worse. Someone had made themselves at home in the place my mother had left me, treating it like their personal property, while I worked abroad to pay off her medical bills. Laughter echoed from upstairs. Deep, familiar laughter that made my stomach twist into knots. Connor's voice carried down the hallway, talking loudly to someone about closing some kind of business deal. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to process what I was seeing around me. Empty beer bottles lined the kitchen counter like soldiers. Mail was scattered across the dining table. Bills with his name printed on them, addressed to my house. My mother's framed family photo was missing from the mantel, replaced by a flat-screen television I'd never seen before. Instead of charging upstairs and screaming at him like every instinct told me to do, something cold and calculating settled over my mind. A strange calmness that felt dangerous, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of everything. The mess, the mail, the evidence. My hands stayed perfectly steady even though my heart felt like it might explode. This wasn't just someone crashing at my place. This was a complete betrayal of trust. Let me be clear about something before I continue with this story. My name is Elena Ward, and what I discovered that day changed everything I thought I knew about my brother. What he'd done while I was working abroad was so much worse than just moving in without permission. It was calculated, deliberate, and built on lies that went deeper than I could have imagined in my worst nightmares. This isn't just about family drama or sibling rivalry. This is about betrayal, theft, and the kind of deception that cuts so deep it changes how you see someone forever. Connor didn't just take advantage of my absence. He built an entire life on top of my sacrifice, using my mother's memory and my trust as stepping stones for his own selfish gain and financial profit. By the time I was done handling this situation, he would learn that some lines should never be crossed. And sometimes the quietest revenge is the most devastating. The kind that echoes through every aspect of someone's life until they understand the true cost of their actions. But I'm getting ahead of myself and the systematic destruction I was about to unleash. First, let me tell you exactly who I am and how we got here. Because understanding the foundation of trust that Connor destroyed will help you appreciate the perfect justice of what happened next. My mother didn't raise a victim. She raised a woman who knew how to solve problems methodically and permanently. My name is Elena Ward and I'm 35 years old. Until this moment, I thought family meant something. I work as a systems analyst, and I'd spent the last 10 months in Switzerland managing database migrations for a major tech company. The contract paid well enough to cover my mother's remaining medical bills and keep our family home safe. Connor is my younger brother by 3 years. When Mom got diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago, I took extended leave to care for her full-time. Connor visited exactly twice during her entire illness. He said he was too busy building his empire, with some ridiculous startup idea that never went anywhere. When she passed away 8 months ago, she left me the house in her will. It was her way of saying thank you for staying by her side when she needed me most. Before leaving for Zurich, I'd asked Connor to check on the place occasionally. Water the plants, collect the mail, maybe stop by once a week. Simple brother duties that should have meant nothing. He'd agreed with that charming smile that used to make me feel safe and loved. The day before my flight to Switzerland, Connor and I had sat in this exact living room. I'd handed him the spare key, trusting him with everything that mattered to me. Just keep an eye on things while I'm gone, I'd said, feeling grateful to have family I could depend on. Make sure the place doesn't fall apart or get broken into. He'd nodded seriously, promising to check in every week without fail. Maybe I'll crash here sometimes if I'm in the neighborhood, he'd added casually. I thought he meant occasionally, like when he visited friends who lived nearby. Nothing more than that. He'd hugged me goodbye at the airport, telling me how proud he was of my career success. Don't worry about anything back home, sis, he'd said with that confident grin. I've got your back no matter what. Those words felt like poison running through my veins now. I remembered feeling so grateful to have family I could trust completely. The irony burned in my chest as I stood in my violated home, realizing how completely wrong I'd been about my own brother. I crept through my own house like a burglar, documenting everything with my phone camera. In the kitchen, I found a stack of mail that made my blood turn to ice water. Bills addressed to Mr. Connor Ward, at my address. A lease renewal notice for some apartment I'd never heard of in my life. Credit card applications with his name, but my home address. Then I found the smoking gun. An official notice from the Homeowners Association about tenant complaints regarding excessive noise and unauthorized social gatherings. The word tenant jumped out at me like a slap across the face. As if Connor was renting my house from someone else entirely. My hands started shaking as I photographed each piece of evidence. In the junk drawer where Mom used to keep takeout menus, I discovered business cards for something called Ward Property Management, with Connor's phone number printed at the bottom. My last name, my address, my inherited property being used as the foundation for his fake business venture. The violation felt deeper than simple theft. This was identity fraud, family betrayal, and complete destruction of everything Mom had worked to leave me. My laptop was still sitting in my old bedroom, thankfully untouched by whatever Connor had been doing. He'd apparently claimed the master bedroom for himself, the room where my mother had spent her final months. I logged into my cloud storage and found something that made me feel physically sick. A spreadsheet he'd accidentally shared with me months ago, labeled Property Income Q1 Q2. Row after row of rental payments, all listing my home address as the location. Short-term vacation stays, weekend guests, business travelers looking for temporary housing. He'd been running a completely illegal Airbnb operation from my house, collecting thousands of dollars while I worked overseas to pay off medical debt. The total at the bottom made me dizzy with rage. $18,000 collected over 6 months of unauthorized rentals. Nearly $20,000 earned from renting out my inheritance while I struggled financially in a foreign country. The spreadsheet even included guest reviews and ratings. 5 stars for Connor's clean, comfortable space with great amenities. One review specifically mentioned beautiful family photos throughout the house that made it feel like home. He was literally using my mother's memory to sell his elaborate lie to strangers. The social media photos were what finally broke something inside me. While Connor showered upstairs, completely unaware that I'd returned home early, I scrolled through his Facebook and Instagram accounts. Image after image felt like daggers stabbing into my heart. Barbecue parties in my backyard with people I'd never seen before in my life. Groups of strangers eating dinner off my mother's good china. The delicate set she'd only use for Christmas, Easter, and other special family occasions. Connor posing in the kitchen like he owned every inch of it. Arms spread wide with a caption reading, "Living the dream in my beautiful new place." Comments from friends congratulating him on his gorgeous home, and asking for housewarming party invitations. One photo showed him giving a toast with Mom's crystal wine glasses, the ones she'd carefully saved for milestone celebrations. Another image showed him in her rose garden, hosting what looked like some kind of business meeting or networking event. That garden where I'd helped her plant every flower the summer before she died. He wasn't just stealing my house and my money. He was stealing her memory, her legacy, everything she'd worked 30 years to build and preserve. Instead of storming upstairs and confronting him immediately, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I called a nearby hotel and booked a room for an entire week. I needed time to think clearly, to plan my next moves, and to fully understand the legal implications of what I'd discovered. Before quietly leaving my own house, I gathered the most important documents from my mother's old desk: the house deed, her will, insurance paperwork, and financial records. In the bottom drawer, underneath old tax returns, I found something I'd completely forgotten about. The living trust papers Mom had insisted we set up before her illness got too serious. She'd been paranoid about protecting family assets, especially after Dad's business had failed so dramatically years earlier. The trust included specific clauses about unauthorized occupancy and asset protection that I'd thought were unnecessary at the time. But now I understood my mother's wisdom perfectly. She'd always said Connor was charming but fundamentally reckless with money and responsibility. Without ever saying it directly, she'd been preparing for exactly this kind of situation. Mom had known her son better than I'd realized. From my sterile hotel room, I called the bank that managed the living trust my mother had established. The representative, a professional woman named Mrs. Campbell, listened carefully as I explained the entire situation in detail. "Yes, Ms. Ward, we can absolutely activate the asset protection clause based on what you're describing," she said in a calm, reassuring voice. "Unauthorized occupancy by family members violates the specific terms of the trust agreement. We'll need proper documentation, but based on your description, we can begin formal eviction proceedings within 48 hours. The steadiness in her voice helped calm my racing pulse. This wasn't about revenge or family drama. This was about legal protection of inherited assets according to established trust law. The unauthorized occupant will receive official notice through our legal department, she continued professionally. After that, they'll have exactly 72 hours to vacate voluntarily or face forced removal by local authorities. I thanked her politely and hung up the phone, feeling something between tremendous relief and dark anticipation. Connor had absolutely no idea what was heading his way. He'd been playing his little game using my mother's house as his personal piggy bank. Now the bank would play by the actual rules he'd chosen to ignore completely. For 3 straight days, I became a spy watching my own neighborhood. I parked across the street in a rental car, observing Connor come and go like he owned every inch of the property. He'd even installed a smart doorbell system on my front door, and was giving guided tours to potential short-term rental guests. I watched him shake hands confidently with a young couple, probably promising them a perfect weekend getaway experience. His arrogance was absolutely stunning to witness. He walked with the swagger of someone who genuinely believed his own elaborate lies. On the second day of surveillance, I watched him unload cleaning supplies from his car, obviously preparing the house for new paying guests. He was treating my mother's inheritance like his personal business venture and money-making machine. The neighbors walked past regularly, some stopping to wave at him in a friendly way. They all thought he lived there legitimately now. One elderly woman even stopped for a long chat, complimenting him enthusiastically on how well he was maintaining the front garden. I wanted to roll down my window and scream that those were my mother's roses, my mother's home, my mother's precious legacy that he was systematically destroying for profit. The final piece of evidence arrived in my email that same evening. Connor had sent me a scanned document from his phone, thinking I was still working in Switzerland, asking me to quickly confirm this rental authorization paperwork. It was supposedly my signature on an official property management agreement, giving him complete permission to rent out the house while I worked abroad. Except I had never signed anything remotely like that document in my entire life. Looking more closely at the signature, I immediately recognized what he'd done. He'd traced my handwriting from old documents in Mom's medical filing cabinet, insurance authorization forms, hospital paperwork, legal documents I'd signed while caring for her during treatment. The forgery was decent but definitely not perfect under close examination. The E in my name Elena had a slight tremor that he couldn't replicate properly. I'd caught him red-handed stealing more than just my house. I'd caught him committing actual signature fraud and document forgery. I immediately forwarded the fake document to Mrs. Campbell at the bank with a simple, direct message. Please proceed with all available legal remedies immediately. The trap was set beautifully and completely. I sent the bank everything I'd gathered, photographs, financial records, the forged signature document, proof of unauthorized rental income, and social media evidence. Mrs. Campbell assured me that their legal team would handle everything discreetly and with maximum efficiency. Mr. Ward will receive official legal notice via professional courier tomorrow morning, she explained calmly. Based on the overwhelming evidence you've provided, This appears to be a completely clear-cut case of unauthorized occupancy and fraudulent documentation. I felt oddly peaceful, like a chess master watching all the pieces fall perfectly into place according to plan. That evening, I drove past my house one final time before everything changed forever. Connor was hosting yet another loud gathering, music playing at inappropriate volumes, multiple cars filling up my entire driveway like it was some kind of nightclub. He had absolutely no idea that tomorrow morning would change his entire life completely. He was probably planning his next rental booking at that very moment, counting money he'd earned by exploiting my mother's memory and my trust. The irony was absolutely perfect. He'd been so focused on playing the perfect host and businessman that he'd forgotten to consider who actually owned the property he was profiting from. The courier arrived at exactly 9:15 a.m. on Thursday morning. I watched everything unfold from my car across the street as Connor answered the front door in his bathrobe, probably assuming it was just a delivery for one of his current rental guests. His facial expression changed dramatically as he read through the official legal papers. I could see him gesturing angrily and pointing at the documents, probably arguing with the courier like shooting the messenger would somehow solve his growing problem. He immediately called someone on his phone, pressing it tightly against his ear while pacing back and forth on the front porch. Then he did something that almost made me laugh out loud. He called my Swiss phone number, the one he still thought was overseas. I let it ring exactly twice before answering, making my voice sound groggy and confused. "Elena, there's some kind of crazy mix-up happening with the house," he said, panic clearly creeping into his usually confident tone. "Some ridiculous bank nonsense about eviction proceedings. Can you please call them immediately and straighten this whole mess out?" I played completely innocent and confused, asking him to explain everything slowly and clearly. Every single word he spoke was being automatically recorded on my phone, creating even more evidence of his fraudulent activities and lies. "I honestly don't understand what you're talking about, Connor," I said, keeping my voice perfectly innocent and sleepy. "Eviction from where exactly? You told me you were just checking on the place occasionally, like we agreed." His frantic explanation became more contradictory and desperate by the minute. He claimed he'd been house-sitting full-time for security purposes, to protect my valuable investment from potential break-ins. Then in the same breath, he said he'd been managing a few short-term rentals to help cover basic maintenance costs and utilities. Each new lie dug his hole significantly deeper. When I pressed him for details about the rental income, he frantically insisted it was just barely covering monthly expenses and upkeep, but I could hear the obvious panic and guilt in his voice. "Look, don't worry about any of this," he finally said desperately. "I'll handle this bank confusion myself. It's probably just some kind of paperwork mix-up or computer error." After hanging up, I immediately called Mrs. Campbell back. He just openly admitted to unauthorized rental operations and financial management of my property, I told her. "Everything is recorded and documented." She thanked me professionally for the additional evidence. The legal case was becoming completely ironclad and undeniable. By Friday afternoon, the bank's legal team arrived at my house in full force. 2 representatives in dark business suits, carrying official clipboards and documentation folders. Connor tried his usual charm offensive immediately, smiling broadly and offering them coffee like they were social guests. I watched from my car across the street as his confidence crumbled in real time. They calmly presented the trust documents, the property deed, and overwhelming evidence of unauthorized occupancy. Connor's voice grew louder and more desperate, his hand gestures becoming increasingly frantic. I could see him pointing at his car, at the house, probably claiming some kind of ownership rights or family permission. The bank representatives remained completely calm and professional, simply stating legal facts and requirements without emotion. When Connor demanded to call his sister, meaning me, they politely explained that the actual property owner had already been contacted and had personally initiated these legal proceedings. The exact moment of realization hit him like a physical punch to the stomach. His shoulders sagged visibly as he finally understood that I knew absolutely everything about his scam. The charm and confidence drained from his face like water through a broken dam. Within 1 hour, a small crowd of curious neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. Connor's friends from recent parties started arriving, thinking they were witnessing some kind of bureaucratic mistake or misunderstanding. Someone pulled out their phone and started filming, probably expecting the whole thing to be some kind of comedy or entertainment. But as the bank representatives calmly explained the formal 72-hour eviction notice, the mood of the crowd shifted dramatically. The videos that had started as jokes quickly became evidence of Connor's very public humiliation and downfall. I could hear fragments of neighborhood conversations. "Wait, I thought he owned this place now." Another voice replied, "No, his sister owns it. She's been working overseas. Oh my God, has he been illegally squatting this whole time?" The whispers and gossip spread through the gathered crowd like wildfire. Connor stood in the center of it all, no longer the confident host and successful businessman, but an exposed fraud facing the consequences of his choices in front of everyone who'd believed his lies. His carefully constructed fake identity was collapsing in broad daylight for the entire neighborhood to witness and record. That final night, I parked across the street one last time to watch the end of Connor's scheme. He moved through the house like a defeated ghost, packing his belongings in complete darkness. No more parties or loud music. No more confident swagger or business meetings. Just a man finally facing the reality of what he'd done to his own family. I felt no satisfaction or joy watching him load cardboard boxes into his car, only a strange emptiness in my chest. This was my little brother, the same boy who used to build pillow forts with me in this exact backyard when we were children. But that innocent boy had grown into someone who could steal from family, forge official signatures, and profit from our mother's sacred memory without any conscience. As he carried out his final box around midnight, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the $18,000 he'd stolen from my inheritance, the trust he'd violated so completely, and the sacred family space he'd turned into a cheap business venture. Some bridges burn themselves beyond any possibility of repair. Some choices have consequences that last forever. My father called the next morning, his voice tight with barely controlled anger and disappointment. "Connor told me what happened yesterday," he said carefully. "He's claiming you had some kind of emotional breakdown while working overseas, and that you're taking it out on him unfairly." Without saying a word, I calmly sent Dad all the evidence I'd gathered, photographs, financial records, the forged signature, social media posts, everything. The silence stretched uncomfortably long after I heard his phone notification ping with the incoming messages. Finally, he spoke in a voice I barely recognized. "Jesus Christ, Elena. I had absolutely no idea it was this bad. He told me you'd given him complete permission to manage the property while you worked abroad." His voice cracked slightly with what sounded like shame. "Your mother always worried about Connor's judgment and decision-making, but I never imagined he'd do something like this to his own family." For the first time since Mom's funeral 8 months earlier, Dad and I were actually on the same side of a family issue. "He did this entirely to himself," Dad said quietly. "I'm truly sorry you had to handle this nightmare completely alone." It felt like the first genuinely honest conversation we'd had in several years. The bank formally repossessed the property for 2 full weeks of professional inspection and complete security reset. Every single lock was changed and upgraded. Every door was reinforced with new deadbolts. The professional cleaning crew discovered evidence of Connor's rental operation everywhere throughout the house. Multiple sets of copied keys, detailed guest information sheets, even a 3-ring binder with house rules and check-in procedures for short-term tenants. Mrs. Campbell called to update me on their ongoing investigation. "The payment processor has frozen all his associated accounts pending a fraud review," she explained professionally. "There's also a permanent credit report flag for the forged documentation he submitted." Connor's entire financial life was systematically unraveling just like his housing situation. The bank's forensic accounting team was carefully calculating total damages, not just the rental income he'd stolen, but potential tax implications, property damage assessments, and substantial legal costs. What had started as free housing and easy money had become the most expensive mistake of his entire life. The consequences were spreading far beyond just losing access to my house. Word spread quickly through Connor's entire business and social network like a virus. The landlord forums he'd used to research competitive rental rates were now posting warnings about Connor Ward, documented fraudulent property management, and forged legal documentation. His fake business cards had become key evidence in a potential criminal fraud case. No legitimate property management company would consider hiring him. No responsible landlord would rent to him. His credit score was completely destroyed, his reputation permanently ruined, his future prospects severely limited. I heard through mutual friends that he was staying in a weekly rate motel, trying desperately to rebuild his life from absolutely nothing. The same friends who'd enjoyed parties at my house now avoided his phone calls entirely. The networking events where he'd bragged confidently about his expanding property portfolio were completely closed to him now. His entire public identity had been built on elaborate lies, and without my house to support his fake image, everything collapsed like a house of cards. The investigation expanded beyond just my case. Other property owners came forward with similar stories. Connor had apparently tried his scheme at multiple locations, targeting family members and friends who traveled for work. The pattern of behavior painted him as a serial fraud artist who exploited trust systematically. Local news picked up the story, running a segment about rental scams targeting traveling professionals. His photo appeared on television as a cautionary tale. The shame reached our extended family, with cousins and relatives calling to express their shock and disappointment. Karma, it seemed, had a way of being extremely thorough and long-lasting. 2 weeks later, I walked through my reclaimed house carrying the new keys. The bank's professional restoration team had been incredibly thorough. Fresh paint covered walls that had been damaged during Connor's parties, new security locks secured every possible entrance, and professional deep cleaning had completely removed the lingering smell of strangers and betrayal. Standing in my mother's favorite kitchen, I felt her presence again for the first time since returning from Switzerland. The silence was different now, not empty or violated, but genuinely peaceful and safe. I opened the window above her carefully tended rose garden and breathed deeply. The house felt like a real home again, like the sanctuary and safe haven she'd always meant it to be for our family. I carefully placed her favorite family photograph back on the mantel, the one Connor had removed and hidden away. It showed our family together at Lake Tahoe, all of us smiling and happy before cancer, and death and betrayal changed everything forever. I kept it safe, Mom. I whispered to the empty rooms around me. I kept our home safe just like you asked me to. The words echoed softly through the house like a promise finally kept. I spent hours that first day simply walking through each room, reacquainting myself with spaces that held 30 years of memories. In her bedroom, I found items Connor had boxed up and stored in the closet. Her jewelry, her books, small treasures that told the story of her life. I returned each piece to its rightful place with reverent care. The house began to feel whole again, filled with her spirit and protected by her love. I understood now why she'd insisted on the trust protection. She'd known that some people, even family, might try to take what wasn't theirs. Her wisdom had saved everything that mattered. I'd been thinking seriously about my next steps since the day of Connor's eviction. Mom had always talked about her dream of turning the house into something special after she was gone. A place where traveling professionals could find peace and comfort between assignments, like a high-end bed and breakfast with family warmth. Using my systems analysis skills and attention to detail, I researched the completely legal way to accomplish what Connor had attempted through fraud and deception. Proper business licenses and permits, official tax registration and accounting, comprehensive insurance coverage, legitimate rental agreements and guest screening. Within 6 weeks, I successfully launched Ward Haven Properties, a boutique short-term rental service specifically designed for business travelers who needed more comfort than a hotel, but less commitment than a traditional apartment lease. The first official guest was a consulting engineer from Germany who left a glowing 5-star review. Elena's incredible attention to detail and respect for family history made this feel like a real home away from home. Every single dollar earned was completely legal, entirely honest, and invested directly back into preserving and honoring Mom's legacy. The business grew through word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied guests. Corporate clients began booking extended stays for their traveling employees. I created a detailed guest manual that included the history of the house and Mom's story, turning her memory into something beautiful rather than something to be exploited. Each guest who stayed understood they were experiencing something special. A family home opened with love rather than a cold business transaction. The reviews consistently mentioned the warmth and authenticity of the experience. I hired a local cleaning service run by Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor who had known Mom for 20 years. She treated the house with the same respect and care that Mom would have appreciated. The business became profitable within 3 months, generating steady income that allowed me to maintain the property exactly as Mom would have wanted. 3 weeks after officially opening Ward Haven Properties, someone knocked on my front door just as the sun was setting. I looked through the security peephole and saw Connor standing on the porch, baseball cap in his hands, looking significantly older than his 32 years. He'd clearly lost weight since the eviction. His clothes were wrinkled and cheap-looking. The natural confidence that had carried him through his entire life was completely gone. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside or step onto the porch. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice smaller and more humble than I'd ever heard it. "I need to ask you something important." His tone was different, defeated, desperate, genuinely vulnerable. I was wondering if maybe I could rent a room here, just temporarily, while I try to figure out my next steps and get back on my feet. I looked at him for a long, silent moment, studying this stranger who used to be my brother. "You'll have to book through the official website like everyone else," I said calmly and professionally. Ward Haven Properties has very strict screening requirements and background checks for all potential guests. His face fell as he realized I wasn't offering family forgiveness or special treatment. "I understand completely," he whispered, then turned around and walked away into the gathering darkness. I watched him shuffle down the street, shoulders hunched against the evening chill. Part of me wanted to call after him, to offer some kind of reconciliation or family mercy. But then I remembered the months of lies, the forged signatures, the way he'd used Mom's memory to profit from strangers. Trust, once shattered so completely, couldn't be rebuilt with simple apologies. He'd made his choices knowing the risks, believing he'd never face consequences. Now he was learning that actions have lasting effects that extend far beyond the immediate moment. Some lessons could only be learned through experience, and some bridges stayed burned no matter how much someone regretted lighting the match. Standing in my doorway, watching Connor disappear into the evening shadows, I felt the final piece of closure click perfectly into place. This house had survived so much trauma: Mom's long illness, her peaceful death, my overwhelming grief, Connor's betrayal and theft, and now complete rebirth and renewal. But it was still standing strong, still filled with the love and care she'd built into every single room over 30 years. I walked back inside and locked the door securely, not against the world, but protecting the hard-won peace I'd fought to restore and preserve. In the living room, surrounded by carefully arranged family photos and Mom's treasured decorations, I smiled at the beautiful irony of how everything had worked out. Connor had tried to profit from our mother's legacy through fraud, theft, and complete betrayal of family trust. Instead, I'd transformed it into something she would have been genuinely proud of. A legitimate business that honored her memory while supporting my future and dreams. Looking around the peaceful rooms filled with her love, I spoke aloud to the silence. This house finally belongs to someone who truly earned it. For the first time in months, I felt completely and perfectly at home. The next morning, I received a booking request from a traveling nurse who would be working at the local hospital for 3 months. Reading her message about needing a quiet, comfortable place to recover between long shifts, I thought about Mom's years of caring for others as a volunteer at that same hospital. Even in death, her spirit was still helping people find shelter and comfort. I approved the booking immediately, knowing that Mom would have welcomed this woman with open arms. The house was fulfilling its destiny as a place of healing and sanctuary, exactly as she'd always dreamed. The circle was complete, the legacy secure, and justice had been served not through revenge, but through transformation of pain into purpose. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't anger, it's building something better from the pieces left behind.